Hello, everybody. Welcome in. My name is Lainey Rose, and I'm the events manager here at City Bookshop. It's wonderful to be with you all today, both in person and virtually, for those of you that are turning in that way. We always have something on the calendar here at City Bookshop, including 14 different book clubs, in case you didn't know. That's right, 14 different book clubs. We also have a few more in-store events that are coming up to wrap up March. Tomorrow night, we will be having Robin Peguero for his thriller set on our very own Capitol Hill called One in the Chamber. Thursday, we'll be hosting beloved author Kate Claiborne to discuss her next book, The Other Side of Disappearing, in conversation with NPR's Taylor Burton. And then we'll be closing out Women's History Month with a conversation between Denny S. Bryce and Victoria Christopher Murray for Denny's latest book, Can't We Be Friends, a novel of Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe. All the information about this is on our website, and you can go there to find out more information. Before we get to tonight's event, some housekeeping details. Number one, if you could take a moment to silence your cell phones, we would appreciate it. Number two, if you need a restroom, it's upstairs past the cash registers and the greeting cards. Number three, we will have time for questions tonight for both in-person and virtual attendees. So even if you're watching via Zoom, you can participate. Please put those questions in the Q&A feature so that we will see them and can ask on your behalf. And finally, if you need to purchase a copy of tonight's book, we have copies available and we'd be happy to help you out with that. All those copies are upstairs at the register, not on the shelves, and can be purchased prior to the signing line at the end of the event. Conscious Grieving is a book for anyone seeking guidance and support after loss. Renowned grief therapist Claire Bidwell Smith combines her deep personal experience of loss with her long career spent working with thousands of people to introduce a new approach to grief, one that promotes hope and even transformation. Our author of the evening is Claire Bidwell Smith, a therapist specializing in grief and author of The Rules of Inheritance, a Books for a Better Life Award nominee. After This, When Life is Over, Where Do We Go? And Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief. An expert in her field, she's spoken on countless news outlets, radio, and podcast shows, and consults companies like Twitter, GoodRx, and the National Funeral Home Association, and sits on the board of End Well. Her writing has been featured in many national publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, Scientific American, Psychology Today, and Oprah Magazine. Joining her in conversation is Meghan Riordan Jarvis, who is an author, podcast host of Grief is My Side Hustle, two-time TEDx speaker, sought-after keynote speaker, psychotherapist, educator, and consultant specializing in trauma and grief and loss. Founder of the MRJ Consulting, her team consults regularly with Fortune 500 companies to address the many ways grief impacts the workplace. Meghan's best-selling memoir, The End of the Hour, published in November 2023, and Can Anyone Tell Me Why? Essential Questions, there we go, about grief and loss, publishes in 2024. Please give me a helping hand in welcoming our authors of the evening.
Thank you all so much for being here. That was my daughter, Jules, who was hanging out with us in the green room.
Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to be at this bookstore.
No, thank you guys so much for having us.
I lived on Capitol Hill many moons ago, but this is a fantastic new addition. So this is so lovely. It's so lovely to have you all come out tonight. We're going to talk about Claire's her latest that she has. I say gifted. We had some time today and I was like, this book is such a gift. I know we say that and it sounds really corny. But you can see from my tabs that I am already taking a lot away from here. So let's start with.
Well, I just want to say thanks to Meghan for being here. Meghan and I have known each other for a while. She is an incredible trauma therapist and specializes in helping us all understand more about trauma, which is really important. We also have like a really great friendship and we laugh a lot. So we might laugh and giggle a lot tonight.
Trying to be
We're
so
like the
serious
kids
for you.
in middle school, like when we're supposed to be in the library being quiet and we just can't stop laughing. So please excuse us.
I sent her a text when she was in the cabin. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm already giggling. So I understand we're here to talk about grief and loss, and that is sad. And we will talk seriously about grief and loss. I promise. I promise.
One of the most amazing things I think about grief and loss is that all the people I know who work in grief and loss and end of life space are the most vibrant people. They live their lives to the fullest, and we know how to embrace life and laughter because it's so important. I think because we've lost so much and been through so much. So I think it's okay and beautiful.
It is. And actually it's a good segue into talking about this book because, you know, she has written for us a number of books, a memoir and other books. You know, when people talk about grief and anxiety, I'm always like, you don't need to talk to me. Get Claire's book. It tells you everything you need to know. But this book has some new things that you offer us. And this maybe sounds a little bit the opposite of what you would expect, but there's a profound amount of hope in this book. And I think it's one of the things that you can offer folks after you have lived with loss for a significant amount of time. And so I'm really grateful for it because the tone in it feels very encouraging. And I think, you know, there's some really gentle wisdom in here. So my first question just is, you know, why did you want to write another book? They made me.
I have been a writer since I was a kid. I don't know if anybody grows up wanting to be a grief therapist. I did not. I wanted to be a writer. And so I will always write books. And I really love to write about the things that I'm seeing in my work and in the world. And I think there's so much to continue to unpack about grief. We've been talking about it in our culture for a long time, but we still don't do very well in our culture with grief and loss and holding space for it, helping other people move through it. And there was still a lot to be said, I think. And I think that one of the things that was really missing for me in the grief literature, you know, I was 14 when both of my parents got cancer at the same time. I'm an only child. My mom died when I was 18, was a freshman in college, and my father died 7 years later when I was 25. And there were very little books on the shelf about grief. There were no podcasts. There were no Instagram. There were no TikToks about grief. There were no grief talks. And it felt very lonely and isolating. And it's really, there's been a proliferation of information and literature and media about grief, but still the thing that I felt was missing was a kind of more hopeful aspect to it. And I know it can be hard to hear in the beginning of a big loss, a significant loss, profound loss, that there is hope to be found, that there is transformation, that there is positive growth, but it's true. And it's something that I think you can tuck away if you're in the early stages of a big loss. You can just kind of put it in your pocket to think about later. Because in the beginning, I know we just want our person back. We don't want to hear about positive growth and transformation. However, I think it's important to talk about it and have it be part of the conversation about grief.
I think it's one of those things that maybe you don't want to talk about it, maybe you don't want to hang your hat on it, but it is important to know that it's out there. And you and I both work as clinicians with clients. And I think being able to say to the client, you don't have to feel this right now, but maybe you could just trust me that it's somewhere on the horizon. I know lots of folks are planning on taking this book home today, and this is not a spoiler because it's not ruining the plot, but can you talk about the 4 orientations? This is something that is new, and I felt myself sort of tingle when I read it. I'm always looking for something that feels like an anchor to kind of understand things. And I think with all the books that are out there now, sometimes we're saying the same thing using maybe different language. I feel like these 4 orientations are something new that I hadn't thought of before.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of different takes on grief out there. There's stages, there's different, maps around grief. And the reason that is because grief can be really hard and really overwhelming, and it can be very disorienting. And so we kind of naturally look for something to guide us through the process. And I think we cling to a lot of different ideas like the 5 stages of grief because it would be so nice, right? If there was this thing that could just get us through, we just did 5 things and then we were feeling better and it was all okay again. And it's just not possible. And I came up with these 4 orientations. I really like the word orientation because I think that grief is very disorienting. Loss is something that happens to us. We lose somebody significant, we lose anyone. And it's something that happens. It's not something we invited. It's not something we wanted. It's not something we caused. It happened to us. And when something like that happens, we kind of start to think that the grief is happening to us too. But grief is something we can engage with. It's something we can be intentional about and be conscious of. It's something we can really kind of step into in meaningful ways. And so what I wanted to do was show these kind of different orientations of entering into grief. The first orientation is entering into it. We didn't ask to enter into it, but we are here and we are in it. And so we're kind of orienting ourselves. As you know, in the beginning of a big loss or any kind of loss, it feels like you've been dropped on a different planet. The language feels different. You don't even know who you are all the time. Can't trust yourself to like go out to a party and feel like you want to do something like that, or go to the grocery store and not start crying in the cereal aisle. I mean, I don't know what all the different things.
Speak politely to people
Yes.
in any kind of way.
Meghan. And
So
so I think the first orientation is really about like just kind of getting grounded a little bit, finding your bearings within that first initial space of being in loss. And then we can begin to engage with it from there. And engaging with it looks like so many different things and different things for different people. Even just being here, if you are going through loss, is a way of engaging with your grief. Being here and acknowledging that you are grieving, that you've gone through a loss, you're showing up to information about it, you're showing up to feelings that are coming up for you. And from there, we start to surrender to it. And I think surrender is interesting. That's another one of those buzzwords like conscious or intentional. But these words really do have a lot of meaning. When we surrender to grief, it's more about kind of accepting that this thing has happened and we may carry it with us for the rest of our lives. My mom has been gone for 27 years now. I still carry grief around that. I'm raising 3 kids who never got to meet my parents. It's sad that my parents never got to meet them. The grief comes up sometimes still, but in the beginning, it took me a long time to accept that I was going to carry this forever. I fought it. I resisted it. I denied it. I, engaged in unhealthy behaviors to try to get away from it. And eventually I surrendered to the grief, and that was helpful.
I want to say something about this because I use this with a client. Surrender is one of those words that's like sort of provocative to people. Like, right, if you're trying to like kick the ass out of option B, then maybe the concept of surrender, like maybe you need a different book. But I have been working with a client who has a lot of thinking, right? There's so much thinking that goes on. Like, what if I did this differently? What if that had happened differently? What if I turned left instead of right? And this concept of, and what if you just surrender? In those moments with your thoughts, it's been magical. Not what if you accept it? Because a lot of people are not ready to accept, but what if you surrender to it? Would it let some of that thing that we do intellectually, would it give you some rest? So I wanted to tell you that.
Really, it's about stopping
important
fighting it. It's
Yeah.
kind of almost just stop fighting it, stop resisting it so much. It can be so overwhelming in the beginning that we just want to fight it. We want to make it stop, or we want to control it. We want to get our hands around it and just have some kind of authority over our grief. But really, we kind of need to ride the waves of it and let it show us some things that it needs to show us.
You have 2 more stages.
No, I did. I
you
did
did 'em all.
entering,
Yeah, you got it.
engaging, surrendering. No,
Yeah,
I
go.
got transforming. though.
Transforming. One more.
Transforming
I
is
can
the
count.
final one. And again, with the caveat of anybody who's here in the initial throes of grief, I understand that it can be hard to hear about transformation and grief. And for me, I didn't want to hear about that, after my parents were gone. I just wanted them back. I wanted to be quote unquote normal again. All my friends were 25 and post college and living their lives, and I didn't want to be transforming through grief. But I think that I say this a lot, that grief asks a lot of us. It asks us to really examine who we are. It asks us to think about our relationships, what matters to us, the people we care about. It asks us to examine the past and the future. And there's a lot of beauty in that. I think grief is something we will we experience throughout our lifetimes, no matter what, but inevitably we will all go through big loss at some point. And when we do, it really can stop us in our tracks, but there can be a lot to grow and learn from in that space. I think I sit with people all day who are in deep throes of grief, and they are often at their purest version of themselves. Even though it's painful, they're at one of their most true, authentic points of being. And there's so much beauty to be found in that. And I think that is where transformation can occur. I mean, you could talk about post-traumatic growth, which I think is really interesting as well, which is a little bit in the same vein of post-loss growth. Do you want to throw in some post-traumatic growth for us?
I'm like, nice try. This one's about you. It's not my turn to talk. Yeah, I mean, I want to say one thing about this. You have a line in here in your book. I think it's in here a couple of times, that grief is about change. And I think it's such a, a lot of times grievers, everyone who has experienced grief can talk about the before and after. And I think when we talk about before and after, also what we're distinguishing is sort of like the place before the pain, right? Like it was Eden. It was so good then. And then the bad thing happens. And then there's the after. There's something about the reframing and just saying grief is about change, right? Because that's, you lose and the loss transforms you. But there's something about that I think is gentle and encouraging, again, just like in this hopeful way. And it makes me think about, so segue into the thing you just said, it's like an act that we tried to put together, that the notion that we grow, right? That there is this piece of us that has to grow. We have to grow into the griever that is able to sort of carry the pain in a way that allows us to move forward. You're not going to be on the same path that you were on, or at least the one you thought you could see. And I think that's difficult to hear too, right? I think it's difficult to hear that you will, one, continue living. I've worked with lots of people. I know lots of people that they will stay alive, but that is not the same as saying that they want to continue living. And, often what I say is like the human spirit is crazy resilient in ways that you don't even have to totally participate in. Let's see what happens. But also the idea that like, in order to, I always think my image is always sort of like you're walking on a path, there's a hurricane, your trees are down, and you can't just like climb over the tree. You have to kind of assess the situation. And the idea, I think, of post-traumatic growth is, what is your instinct about how to get over, around, or through the tree? What's your instinct? Because there's not one right way for any of this, right? I mean, one of the beauties of having all these books is that people are encouraging us to do different things. But post-traumatic growth for some people might be writing about it. For other people, it might be picking up the violin again and doing music. For other people, it might be hiking, but it's usually a verb. It's usually an action of some kind that then you kind of become that. And I don't know that people can see that coming. I don't know that we know that that's what it's going to be.
Predict what it will be for people either. You can't always say, oh, I can tell this client's gonna, go this direction with their post-traumatic growth or their post-loss growth. But inevitably in time, you really do see people find out more about who they are and who they want to be in the world. And I just think there's so much beauty in that. I wish when I was going through the early throes of my grief and loss that someone had even just been positive about it with me. The messages I received were, just move on, you're fine. Like, you're an adult now, you had your parents long enough. Don't think about it. Just, keep going. That wasn't helpful. I was really deeply grieving. And because I kept getting that message, I tried to not grieve. I tried to not miss them. And that didn't work either. And so I wish from the beginning someone had said, this is going to be really, really hard. Here's some tools and things you can do along the way. And eventually you really are going to get to a place where you feel differently than you do right now.
I want to ask you, talk about in the book something that I think is really important. And I think sometimes we put it like towards the end when you've learned to sort of integrate your loss. But I think you talk about it in a way that allows people to think about it early. The concept of rituals. Can you talk a little bit about the purpose of them and maybe how do we figure it out? We get questions a lot from people who are hitting like an anniversary or birthday, and the question always is, how do I get through the day? And what is not said in that sentence is, with the least amount of pain possible. And we can't guarantee you that second line, right? That isn't, but I think the rituals play a part in helping people have something to do as they are progressing through time.
Yeah, I think we don't have enough rituals in our Western American culture, and there's some that really happen in the beginning of a big loss, but a lot of them don't. We just don't carry them forward into our lives, and we do need them. We need them for anniversaries. We need them for different holidays or just triggering times of the year or things that come up for us. Rituals can be tiny. You can make them up. You could just light a tea light for 5 minutes and think about your person. This can really help us. Say you're headed into like a really fraught family Thanksgiving situation and everyone's going to be grieving differently or not acknowledging your grief, spend 5 minutes alone and light a candle and talk to your person in your head or just cry. And that in it of itself can give you some more space and breath and be able to go into that situation. When we do that, when we take time to honor our person, honor ourselves and our grief, it really enables us to go out and be able to be in the world. I think that it's very hard to be around people who don't see your grief. And I know that everyone who's gone through loss knows what that feels like because we're not very good at it here in this country. And so how to walk through our daily lives, go to work, go to school pickup, go to family functions, and not feel seen in this huge thing that we're carrying around with us on a daily basis, that is really hard. And so to create even just little rituals for ourselves, to recognize it for ourselves, to honor it for us, can give us the kind of strength to go out and deal with this world in which we feel unseen.
I don't know if others of you follow Claire on Instagram, but I do religiously. And one of the things I know about your rituals, and I know because we've talked about them, has to do with sort of celebrating the parts of parenting that are important to you. So you may have seen her green spaghetti recently or her green deviled eggs, but can you talk a little bit? And I know you have a special relationship with Day of the Dead. Can you talk about some of the ones that you have in your own life and what that does for you on the other side, right? As still the motherless daughter.
Mine have a lot to do with trying to bring my parents into the lives of my children. They never met them. And, my kids all have grandparents on their father's side and they just don't really know my parents at all. And how will they if I don't bring those things in? So Megan's referring to the green spaghetti I made for St. Patrick's Day. When I was growing up, my mother, we have a little Irish in our family, but not like a significant amount. And every St. Patrick's Day, my mother would make corned beef and cabbage and mashed potatoes, this very elegant meal. And she would dye the mashed potatoes with a hint of green. And it was so delightful to me. When I became a mom, I
doubled down is what you did.
I tripled down. I didn't like corned beef and cabbage, and my kids didn't like mashed potatoes. So I was like, what else can we dye green? And it turned into this.
Turns out there's a lot of things you can dye green.
14 years later, we have figured out a lot of things. Every year we dye as many things green as possible. There's green deviled eggs, green spaghetti, green hummus. I mean, we can do a lot of things with green, but it's become this really fun way to honor my mom, to have them be thinking about her. And so all the holidays, my mom really liked the holidays. The one thing I haven't done yet, one year for Thanksgiving, she stuck a whole bunch of 4th of July sparklers in our turkey. And she came out
it was a different time,
the dining room with the turkey lit full of sparklers. And I haven't done it yet, but somebody who read one of my books did it this past Thanksgiving and sent me some pictures. And thank God their house didn't catch on fire.
Yeah.
I think, those are weird rituals that bring me a lot of delight.
I'm never going to see a turkey without thinking about that. I love that. So again, like there's a sweetness and for us, we don't have to like go into it, but there's grief theory. There's theory around the idea of being able to stay in connection with the people that you've lost and, keep the love extended in a way that keeps them alive. And it's so important when your children haven't, had a chance to meet them. Who else is going to be able to? I want to pivot for a second and ask about, part of the reason I ask these questions, like, can you give us a concrete example, is that when you're grieving, your brain is not at its sharpest, right? And the ideas that we get that are sort of creative are actually a little dark because we're responding to trauma and it's just sort of the way the brain is working. So I think it's really helpful to hear concrete examples of like, what did I do? What was helpful? And you have a section in the book that's like one of my favorites, which is you really break down how to ask for help. And you also sort of talk about what the help can look like, because I'm sure there are lots of people who are listening to us right now who heard that wonderful phrase, let me know if you need anything. But if your creativity and your imagination is not online and you're reeling from something, you can't even think of anything, like never what you're going to eat, in an hour.
I can only think of like sarcastic responses.
Right. Also referring to the anger, I'll tell you what I mean. Yeah. So can you just talk about, from your experience working with lots of clients and your own experience, what is helpful in terms of either asking for help if you're the griever, or also knowing how to maybe show up for people in an actually helpful way?
Yeah. And I think this kind of goes back to the conversation about how people really don't see our grief very well and don't show up for it in so many ways. I mean, if anyone in here is going through it, you know that even sometimes your own family doesn't show up in the ways you need them to, or understand it in the ways you need them to. And then somehow it falls on us as the grievers to educate and inform everyone around us. As if we need something else to be doing while we're grieving, we now have to educate and inform our family and the general population of how to talk to us and how to take care of us.
Spokespeople for grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like most of the time we don't know what we need. We don't even want to need anything. We don't want to be here because our person isn't here. And so we have no idea. And you and I get asked that question all the time of how do you show up for someone who's grieving? And you just show up. You don't have to have anything great to say. You don't have to know what to say. Just be there. And I think half the work that Meghan and I do is being there. We're companions to people who are walking along through their journeys of grief. We can't fix it. We can't bring their person back. We can't give them a blueprint or a formula for how to get through this, but we can be there with them in it. And I think we can ask people to show up in a lot of different ways. I think Colin Campbell, we both love, he wrote a book called Finding the Words. He lost his 2 teenage children and wrote about kind of the experience of going through that and what the larger community, how they, showed up to it or didn't. And at some point in there, he and his wife wrote an email that they sent out to everybody that was like, we want to talk about them. We want to say their names. We need help with this, this, and this, which I think is a really great thing to do. Again, it's hard. You shouldn't do it if it's too much for you to do, but if it feels good and helpful, write down the list of things that you need and that you also, the ways you want people to respond to you. I think that people are really afraid to bring up your loss. Who was it? Was it Stephen Colbert who said, like, people always say that they don't want to bring it up because they don't want to upset me. And he's like, I'm already thinking about it. Like, what do you mean?
Oh, damn it. I forgot. You
forgot.
reminded me.
Right?
That's not over.
So, reminding people that, like, please say their name, please come and tell me stories about them, memories. Ask me how I'm feeling that day, not how I'm doing in general, because that answer is too unwieldy. But there's a lot of ways I think we can just write out a brief thing that we can copy and paste into text messages or send out as a mass email and let people know how to show up for us. And I think most people, I still believe in humanity at large. And I think most people want to help. They just don't know what to do and they don't know how to show up. So we can give them a few really easy things they can do.
And that part, it always makes me want to apologize from the field that we have not yet figured out a way to just put that conversation in the general populace, that it isn't fair on anyone. It certainly isn't fair on a griever, but it isn't really fair on anyone that we kind of don't have some general conversation that feels more open and comfortable for us to say, I'm trying to support you. How can I support you? I mean, Colin Campbell's wife, Gail, wrote that, and actually she read it to her staff. She's a TV writer. And I just thought, like, imagine if everybody did that at work and just said, I'm the griever, I'm coming into work and I'm going to let you know. And also if your companies made sure that they had meetings to say, when people are grieving, this is our policy and this is what we're doing. And this is what we expect of each other. And this is how we're going to follow up. And this is how long we're going to do it for. But as a clinician, it sort of feels like, like all the things, like how we don't talk about menopause and how we don't, there's a million things we don't talk about because they're awkward and uncomfortable, but then it leaves the general population undereducated. And there are some things that we really could teach and tell them. The one thing I'll say about asking for help and showing up with help is two of my children are here. They can attest to this. I'm a terrible cook. So the idea that what we have latched onto as a culture, my son is nodding, like vigorously nodding. No one wants my lasagna. So I just want to, I love saying this out loud, which is like, you do not have to, because you got like a sign up genius, do that. You can do the thing that is true to you. So if you are amazing at lawn care, offer lawn care. If you are really good, I mean, I have an SUV. I could have 3 to 4 other kids in my car and I wouldn't even notice. So I'll take your kids for a couple of days. But you can offer the thing that's actually authentic to you. If you want to help somebody with their taxes, that's amazing. Offer to help with the taxes. It doesn't have to be food. It's not that the food isn't really helpful. It is. But I think the idea is like, we don't know what to do as a culture. We don't know how to show up for people. And it's also awkward that we don't want to, get it wrong.
The big problem is when that happens, when people don't show up, when they don't acknowledge it, when they don't know how to talk to us about it, we begin to think we're doing something wrong. We shouldn't be grieving anymore. Yeah. We shouldn't be grieving this long. We shouldn't be needing support. We shouldn't be, having a hard time going back to work. We get 3-5 days of bereavement leave. The message that sends to us as people, as our culture, is that we should be moving through it much faster. We should be okay. We should be better. And so I can't tell you how many of my clients come in and they're like, I think I'm doing it wrong because I'm still sad, or I'm not crying, or I'm angry, or whatever it is that they've kind of received this outside message that they should be doing better at.
I mean, sometimes they receive a direct message from their great aunt who's like, oh, are you still sad? It comes at you, it makes people uncomfortable and there isn't a general sort of understanding or trajectory. And we haven't educated ourselves. And so
I just led a grief retreat in February, and there was a woman there who lost her husband 2 years ago. And she said she got a text message from someone who, when they heard she was at the retreat, they were like, oh, you're still grieving him? And it was like, it was her husband.
And also like, we're never going to talk to you again for that dumb email and you deserve it. But that, again, it's a little bit like the 5 stages of grief. Like when people, that's on TV and it's in books and it's, that's a little bit like saying the world is flat. Like it's not helping people. And there should be people around us that are like, no, that's not a real thing. Like it was well-intended. There are so many well-intended things that we need to sort of gently correct. And so in that, being able to say, I hear the loving thing you mean, but of course I'm still grieving my husband. It lasts forever. And also I'm never going to speak to you again. But that person, there should be some accountability, right? There should be some accountability. Like if you have someone in your life who lost their husband, listen to a podcast, read a book, go to a book signing so that you can engage. One of the stories I tell all the time is that when my mom died suddenly, my best friend, now she's known me since I was 11, like we probably speak in a secret language in our head together. But she came to my house and asked for my mom's planner, which I like vaguely remember. I also vaguely remember her giving me like ham and cheese to eat. And then later, like days later, I was like, why did you want my mom's planner? And she was like, I called all her doctors and told them that she had died. She like went to the, anything that said doctor, she called and canceled all those appointments.
That is helpful.
Right. And I was like, how did you think of that? How did she think of that? She called her friend whose mother had died 6 years before and was like, what was the thing? What was the hardest thing that you had to do that someone could have done for you? And that friend said, calling the doctors was so hard because the doctor's offices said terrible things. Like the nurses, the reception, they were like, well, she has an outstanding bill or what, just like not helpful stuff. Cause there's a little bit of a maybe disassociation in medical spaces that, can make for a bit of a disconnect, I think. So if there was one thing that you could either kind of erase from the ethos as it is right now or add in so that people who are in this audience or in general really could take from this side of your wisdom, what might that sound like?
I always think about the length of time that we are allotted to grieve. And I think it's really okay to grieve for a long time. And I think it's okay to carry loss for a long time. And again, that cultural message that comes around us really influences how long we let ourselves grieve and how long we let ourselves carry it. And so often we are still grieving, but we're not even allowing ourselves to recognize that. And so it's spilling out in other ways. So I think just letting ourselves grieve for much longer than maybe we even want to, and letting ourselves carry loss sometimes for our whole lives. I think that that's okay. And I just really want to make more space for that. And also just the idea that there is beauty to be found in all of this. I I have people ask me all the time if this is hard and sad, the work I do. And sure, kind of, but um, really it's beautiful. I mean, grief is about relationships and it's about being human and it's about moving through the world. And some of those relationships are complicated and some are really beautiful and perfect and loving, but there's grief that comes with all of it. And I think it's so amazing that we get to connect as humans and that we get to have these experiences together as humans. And with that comes grief. And that's kind of a reflection of this thing that we got to have with someone and something that even isn't over, our relationships continue after they're gone too. So I just think there's so much beauty in it all.
I love that. And I think there is a little, maybe that like live every day, like it's your last when you have experienced a loss, but there, there's some brain science about like that doesn't work. We're too repetitive in our patterns but I do think, and I can even say this with my friendship with Claire, that when you have experienced significant loss, some of the crap of life has to drop away. Some of the things that you, I don't know, hold yourself accountable for. I remember after I had a baby being like, wow, I'm probably never going to be able to hate my body the way that I did when I was 20 because it made a person. And that person, is healthy and here. There's something about profound loss and living through profound loss that some of those jeans are on sale doesn't matter as much anymore. And again, I think when you're in the early days, someone's saying like, be grateful or see beauty, like you want to slap their face. There is nothing to be, except that I have some chills when I'm saying this. Like I do see exquisitely beautiful things and they feel like spiritual in a way that they didn't before. And the same, I mean, I don't want to sound like Oprah, which is like practice your gratitude every day, but there is something about sort of counting your blessings and being grateful that you can show up for things, or that, you have memories of that person who isn't here anymore showing up for those things.
I think it really teaches us what matters to us, and there's so much that doesn't matter. There's so much stuff out there that just doesn't matter. And there's something really freeing that sometimes comes with loss. And it's not, you didn't want it again, but it can be a really incredible part of it where you just realize what matters and how you want to go forth with what matters.
And I will just say to this audience that, lest you think that we only talk in soft voices and laugh a little bit, we also have like hearts that beat with a white hot rage that you get 5 days off for. It's 5, the average now. And Claire talks to companies. I talk to companies. We are doing the fact that anyone anywhere thinks that a long weekend, there are people in this room who are getting longer for spring break and Easter than we get for the idea of bereavement. And, when you sit with companies and you're like, so how long would somebody take if they had back surgery? Like, how would you feel? What would be reasonable? Would you be able to flex their time? Yes. Yeah, of course we would. They have back surgery. They're going to be on painkillers. They're going to be, that conversation is like a no-brainer. But when you say, okay, and if their spouse dies, it's like, well, our bereavement policy is 3 days. Like, okay, but where did that come from? Like, based on what? Is there neuroscience? Is there bioscience? Is there spiritual guidance? Like,
there's just money.
There's just capitalism. So I just want to say to the group that are here, people who know, usually the folks that come to the things that we're talking about are already touched by the things that we're talking about, but just know that we are talking to chief people officers and HR directors and not trying to trick them, but I do start with like, oh, so if someone had to have a major surgery, how long would they have off? And also very straight face, just saying, and what theory is that based on? Can you point to the literature that says that someone is healthy and well enough to come back after 5 days? And for those of you who don't know me, I took 6 months off after my mom died because I was just I had PTSD and I was
a beautiful memoir about this called The End of the Hour, which I highly recommend.
That is very sweet of you to say, but I was angry all the time. So I was not fit for company. I just wasn't, I was mad at the UPS guy. I was mad at, just because he kept delivering boxes, like the world was still tilting on its same axis. And I found that wildly insulting. So anyway, I just want to say that, Claire's book is a beautiful, it's a guidepost. I think it's like a lighthouse, and it'll remind you of things that you already know. And I think give you a growth edge in a number of places. I really love the way that you talk about ritual. There's a page, she was on my podcast and I had her read, which is just like, it's an okay page. It's like, I don't know, there's 50 things that you're like, it's okay. It's okay. And I've read it over and over again. I've read it to people out loud because it's really comforting to be reminded that like, you're not failing just because you're feeling. That's not what's happening. You're just living. That's the way it is. How are we doing on time? Oh, I love it. I'm doing my job appropriately. So we would love for you, anybody who has questions for Claire, we would love to take them. And we do not bite. We laugh. But
You
we
might
do
bite
not. I might
sometimes.
bite. I mean, I told you I was very angry. I had a long span of anger. That was my
I used to be
primary.
angry too.
Miss Abby Maslin here in the front row. Let's just say we also have a very distinguished author and friend here, right here. Abby.
Megan, it's so helpful to hear about your mom's planner because I want to tuck this away in my
Yeah.
app and save it for the day that I need that list.
Yes.
So what were some of the things that you felt were most helpful for you, or maybe things you've heard from clients that really touched them like that?
Repeat the question. Don't forget.
What is most helpful to us when we need that kind of help afterwards? I mean, I think some of this really falls, we can go into a really long conversation about end of life planning, which we are also really terrible at in this
So
country.
bad.
I had like a brief moment of hope during the pandemic that we were going to wake up to the fact that we all need to be planning for end of life when we are healthy and young. But that we've slipped back into denial about that again. I'll tell you, my dad really walked me into his death. It was like his last act of parenting, and it was such a beautiful thing. My mother had died a very medicalized death that she really did not face. And my father chose a really different approach and really wanted to face the end of his life, but he really demanded that I do it with him. And I kind of went kicking and screaming because it was so hard. I was going to lose my only remaining parent. And every day he would have me sit at the table and make these lists of like, what are the first 5 things you do when I die? And I was just like, Dad. And he was like, you call the mortuary, but number 1, just like
Stop, drop,
call
and
Social
roll.
Security, order at least 7 copies of the death certificate. I still have this piece of paper, and there's teardrops on it. I mean, it's really, but it's helpful. It's just helpful for us to face these things and to talk about them. My friend Alua Arthur, who's a death doula, says, what is it? Talking about sex won't make you pregnant, and talking about death is not going to make you dead. So we have got to talk about these things more. We really do. And I think that is a really helpful thing we can be doing in general. Have conversations with your loved ones now, tonight, today. This is not an answer to what to do for grieving people, but I just have gone off on it, something passionate that I feel strongly about.
And that doesn't have to be a bummer either. Like, we have a mutual friend and she has a company called Good to Go, and it's like a party. You come and she has this whole big folder
The
and
departure file.
the departure file. I mean, it's amazing. And it's, I think she's done it sort of like guerrilla style where she's like, we're going to have a party, come to the party. And then it's like, please sit down and take this pen. But for anyone who has experienced the death of someone, finding a folder that says what, songs they
It's
want
the
at their funerals.
greatest gift you could leave your loved ones is just having organized your stuff, leaving them like, what are your wishes for, your body? What are your wishes for that necklace you always wear? Any of that stuff, what is your damn email password? All of those things. It is such a gift to the people that you love.
I will say, as a clinician, what I have heard from people who have children is when whatever their loss is, showing up for the kids, right when my mom died, my friend Dana, he said 2 things. 1, come and live in my house. You're going to need more space to grieve, which was an incredible gift. He wasn't home. His wife had died, so he knew what it was like. And the second thing he said was, get a babysitter for your kids, because my mom died during the summer and he was like, they're going to want ice cream in the beach and you're going to want to kick them. And that was exactly what happened. So we got a babysitter. Having something that allows your kids to be kids so that, somebody else can decorate your house for Christmas. Our friend Natasha Sislo wrote a really beautiful book that talks about how someone brought like not only the presents, but also the Christmas tree into her home. And she had instant Christmas. But those kinds of things I hear a lot, which is like, I cannot dig down to the well of whatever is needed to produce this. I don't have the energy. It's like, I don't have the emotional money for it, but other people do, and they want something really concrete. And the idea of running to Target to get your toddlers some toys is like, you have to remember that it's a gift to give other people something concrete to do. They want to do something and they want it to feel good. So those kinds of showing up for the kids, because the kids still need to be kids, even if they're sad, is important, I think. I spy with my little eye. Jules is in the back. How about another question? How about another something you're wondering? It can be nice and specific. We love it. What kind of like advice or like how would you guys also like it?
Losing parents young is the question. I think it's really hard. It's really hard to lose parents young. It's really hard to, that's one that's really not recognized a lot, especially by your peers. And so I think that's one of the things that makes it really hard. You've got to find a community. I think you really have to find a community of other people who get it. And also learn a lot about parenting yourself. That took me a long time to figure out. I thought the answer, my mom and I were so close. I thought the answer to not having a mom was not needing a mom. That was not the answer. The answer was that I needed to learn how to mother myself. I needed to learn how to be my own grown up, my own parent, how to take care of myself, how to nurture myself, how to show myself the kind of compassion that they would have shown me, and how to just really kind of not feel so alone and not feel this kind of, I think what I've felt most of all is that there's just nothing underneath, no safety net. So how do you create that safety net and that sense of stability within your life? I think it really does help to learn a lot about grief and just find communities within there to feel understood.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, mostly we're talking about someone actually dying, but with parents, there can be really profound estrangement that happens. There's some extraordinary programs here in DC that help children who've been kicked out of their homes for living in ways that their families don't agree with. And some of those kids are really young. And I think learning to parent yourself, show up for, but you know, when you're 16 or 18, developmentally, you haven't grown into the adult to show up for yet. So allowing yourself to be parented and loved by other adults and seeking them out, and maybe even concretely asking, like the way that in AA we ask for a sponsor. I've had clients have really beautiful parenting experiences. And I'm almost 50, but there are people who mother me in ways that I didn't know to expect, but I like naming it as that because they are caring for me and doing some of the things, caring about a risk that I'm taking, the way that my mom would have been, or celebrating some sort of a victory the way that my mom would have done. So I think it's important to also remember that, like, we didn't all get great parents. We didn't all get the connections and so being able to figure out how to develop those relationships, or inviting yourself to think about developing those relationships is really powerful. More questions? Yes, Sarah.
Kind of to even more specific, what actual advice
I kind of had to work backwards because I just didn't parent myself for a long time. And then I was kind of dealing with the fallout of that. And so at one point I began to work backwards and think about, I actually traced my way back through my whole 20s, which my mom was not here for. And I thought about all these decisions I'd made, like to move to New York or to move in with this guy or deal with this abusive boss. And I thought, if my mom had been here, gosh, I bet she wouldn't have let me do all of those things. Would have been like, do not move in with that dude. Do not put up with that abusive boss, like all these things. And that way I was able to start really thinking about, okay, how can I look at myself a little differently and look at myself the way she would or a mother would, and make different decisions for myself in that way. And that was really helpful. And I still do that to this day. I've had clients who didn't have maybe a great parent. And I had a client who she did not have a good mom, but she was trying to learn how to mother herself. And so she just picked like who would be her ideal mom. And it was Michelle Obama. And she was like, so what would Michelle tell me to do right now? Like if I were good, like, should I do this thing? What would Michelle say? And I think in that way we can
Love
start
that.
to imagine for ourselves. It's so hard to we really lack compassion for ourselves, and I think we often are just so hard on ourselves. So if we can just externalize it in some way, whether it's an imaginary mom or our own parent that's not here, and really kind of think about what they would want for us from a really loving perspective, I think that's a really nice way to start parenting yourself.
I think one of the things that happens too when you're young, because culturally there isn't a lot of room for it, so you kind of learn to adapt, right? Like if there isn't room, then you learn to live without. I think, I mean, I sort of hate this answer when I'm saying it out loud, but I think reconnecting with the idea that like emotions and feelings are the thing that you have to check in with before you go to solve problems, right? So like the concept of reparenting myself, or what would I need my mom or dad to say if they were here? I can't even do that because I need to figure out, I have to like sit and do a quiet moment of meditation, or again, these words are coming out of my mouth. I'm like, really, Meghan, meditation? But something, a pause of some kind to figure out what is it that is achy first. Like, what is the ache first? And again, that concept of mindfulness really is just like being in the moment and understanding what is the moment about? Like, where is the distress in the moment? And sometimes that will bring me to an answer, and other times it just brings me to a conversation. So I have 3 people that I text regularly. And they are deliberately selected because they are very different. So one is my sister, one is my best friend, and one is another friend. And so recently my husband was traveling because all the chaos always happens when he's not there. My son's chocolate lab that we hadn't had for very long ate like, how many grapes did he eat? Like 35 grapes. And for those of you who don't know, like just one grape is apparently toxic to a dog. So I'm already feeling like awesome. And I was really in a state of panic. Like, this dog is going to die, obviously, because everyone knows when you have grief and, when you have tragedy in your life, you go right to the funeral and what are you wearing and who's going to sing the thing. So I'm like burying this dog in my mind as I'm driving to an animal hospital. And I pull over and I text all 3 of them. And I'm like, just so you know, I just need someone to know I need to not be in this moment alone, right? Like I'm that panicked and I'm that disoriented. I need to not be in this moment alone. So I text them, and one of them writes back like really sincerely, like, are you okay? Do you need me to talk you through it? Are you safe to be driving? And I'm like, oh, come on. That's a little overly dramatic, right? So I'm like, I'm fine. I don't need that. And then the second one is like, I'm out. can I call you later? I'm not available. And I'm like, that's fine. I didn't want it. And the third one writes back, effing dogs. And I was like, that's what I needed. Just no. So that's the other thing that I think about is like making sure that you have a mirror, something to reflect to you, so that I'm not great at like being able to just sort of figure out how I'm feeling or thinking. My walking partner, Eva, is here. We walk on Sunday mornings. She also happens to be an Episcopal priest, so that helps with the spirituality component of things. But often I'll start out and be like, I'm so something about something. And she'll be like, let's walk and talk. And by the time I get to the end of it, like I have a very different perspective on what it is that I need in that moment. So even though I hate the words mindfulness and meditation and all that stuff, I really, as someone who really spent a lot of time dissociating from feelings, the invitation to sort of come back and not necessarily even be able to know what they are or know how to solve them, but to just be in the mess of them gets me a little closer to the moment. Yes, Eva.
Well, you're wrapping up. You guys started with joy,
Mm-hmm.
and it just struck me that as you're talking to grief, as I've walked with families and in my own experience, I've never seen laughter show up as much as it does. And I'm talking like the first stage, like when you're just getting through it. And I just wondered if you guys could reflect on that.
Oh, yeah.
The ways that like there's just such a profound sincerity about like I don't know.
The stripped down hysteria. So Eva just said that she's wondering about the experience of the exquisite pain also being connected to real like laughter and joy. And yeah, do you want to talk about that?
I mean, I think there's like a slap happiness that comes on where everything feels so surreal, and you kind of I think physically laughter actually is very amazing in terms of releasing emotion. But I think there's also like a weird trauma component that that comes in there. That's not not my expertise, but I think there's a lot of physical release in it. I think it's really important to laugh. I think sometimes we're just reminding ourselves that we can, and that it's still available, and that we're not completely destroyed as a human, as a soul. I think it's always important to connect to that. And then some of us are really humorous people. We do laugh all the time, even in response to horror. And I think that that's okay. I think there's, but what's the trauma piece of it?
Yeah, I mean, the neural pathways, she's referencing the fact that I work as a trauma therapist as my day job. The neural pathways for the experience of like deep, profound fear and pain is the same conduit for joy. So, it's like traveling, you get to the scary place and you get to the joyful place in, down the same tunnel. Which I think is kind of amazing. And when we talk about it from a therapeutic perspective, people who can experience the depths of the heart and the sorrow and the pain do talk about having access to the real high level joy. And that, that really is because the sort of spectrum of how we let ourselves live energetically. And yeah, I mean, we won't tell the story now, but the very first time I ever met Claire, I mean, we were laughing so hard. People were like stopping on the street to see if we were okay. We were just sort of absurd. And I do think there is something about being able to be with people who know the intensity of real fear and trauma and those terrible moments that you don't think you're going to live through. And just knowing that you both lived through them, that there's a shorthand. I will tell a quick story. It's in my mentor. I mean, it's in my mentor. It's in my memoir, End of the Hour. But when I went to the funeral home with my brother and sister after my mom died, I hadn't gone when my dad died because the bag that I brought only had like neon see-through clothing. So it was like exercise clothing, but nothing that would have been appropriate. So I hadn't been before I went. And the woman who they had been before, 2 years before, they had been and met this woman who looked and sounded exactly like Jan Hooks from Saturday Night Live. So the minute she opened the door, I was like laughing, and they were looking at me, and I was like, how am I the only one laughing? She looks exactly like a cast member from Saturday Night Live. She sounds just like her. So I was doing what I've been doing here, with just like giggling to myself and trying to hold myself tight. And then she took us into the urn room. Have you guys been in the urn room before? Okay, so the urn room, which is like sedate boxes that cost an awful lot of money for what they are. And then also the Little Mermaid. And this, right? Like, and this woman put her hand down on something. I didn't see it beforehand, but it looked exactly like a breast. It was like frosted glass, and she was talking like Jan Hooks. And that's her name, right? And with her hand on this like frosted boob, I was like, no, I can't. So then I went in the other room and I was laughing. I had to go into the bathroom and I was laughing so hard. And I was like, I can't wait to tell my mom this story. And then I was like screaming, sobbing in the back. I mean, it was like that. And it just does it. We just do it. We go from both places. I mean, the one thing that I can tell you is that both are an energetic release, right? Both. I mean, I like fell asleep in the car on the way home. So I think the body does it, but I think the body does it. And I think we're looking for those releases. I can't tell you the number of stories I've heard of people like really inappropriately laughing, which probably is totally appropriate, right? It's probably totally appropriate. A lot of it is in church. A lot of it is like when, you're supposed to be somber, but you can't. How are we doing? One more question. Let it be you. You want to ask. The lab is fine. It turns out that Winston, the 3-year-old chocolate lab, can literally eat anything because the next day was Halloween and he ate 15 small Hershey's bars. And I was just like, you're on your own, man. You're on your own. But no, I mean, he is totally and completely fine. And his insides are made of tin, apparently. The lab is fine. He lived. Yeah. So, right. So wrap us up. So thank you so much for coming. If you want to stay, we're going to sign some books, right? That's what we're going to do. And I really would encourage you to follow Claire on Instagram. It's a joy to see her family and her work and her life, and it will keep you updated to all the books and the things, the podcasts and amazing things that she's doing. It's just a great way to stay connected. And yeah, the book is here. So come and buy one and we'll sign them. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
all
you for
so
being
much.
here, everybody.
I just want to say thanks to East City Books for having us. Thank you. This is such a great bookstore. And thank you to Meghan for making us all laugh and doing the work that you do. Thank you guys. Happy to chat with anybody at the signing table.
Just a moment to reset the space. If you are willing and able to set your chair to